Hello, everyone. I'm David Prosser, the literary and editorial director of the Stratford Festival, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to another virtual Meet the Festival. This week's session's about Macbeth, our film of which began streaming on Thursday night, and I have with me several of the artists from that production, and this is your opportunity to ask them about the show. Just type your questions into your YouTube chat feed and they'll be relayed to me by supernatural agency, or maybe just a colleague on a computer. First of all, let me introduce the Thane himself, Ian Lake. The same year he played Macbeth, Ian was also in The Hypochondriac as Thomas, whose last name I can't pronounce. His other festival roles included Mortimer and Mary Stuart and Barone in Love's Labour's Lost, our film of which begins streaming on May 28th. Macbeth's good lady wife, Lady Macbeth, Kristen Pellerin. No, by the way, just since who knows what order you're in on people's screens, just give a wave when I mention you. Kristen. In 2016, Kristen also played Maggie in our world premiere of Bunny, and the year before that, she gave a multifaceted performance as Joyce in Possible Worlds. Television viewers, of course, know and love her as Leslie Bennett in CBC's Republic of Doyle and as Anne Boleyn in Rain. Michael Blake plays Macduff. Give them a wave. Michael's a regular guest on Virtual Meet the Festival. I don't think he's one yet. And you have until Thursday to catch him as the Duke of Albany in King Lear, and a little longer to enjoy his Cominius in Coriolanus. And then when The Tempest starts streaming this Thursday, you'll see him as Caliban. Now, you may not have seen this next guest before, but you've almost certainly heard him, or at least his work. Thomas Ryder Payne, give us a wave. Thomas is the sound designer of Macbeth, and he's also a composer. His many festival credits include The Tempest, Timon of Athens, Hamlet, The Taming of the Shrew, and King Lear, all of which are part of our current film series. Finally, we also have 3 distinguished alumni of Hogwarts Academy. As the first witch, Bridget Wilson, give us a wave. Among many other festival roles, Bridget was Mrs. Page in last season's The Merry Wives of Windsor. She was Amalia in Napoli Milionaria, Antoinette in The Hypochondriac, and she's been in no fewer than 7 of the Shakespeare productions we've filmed so far in this series. Second witch, give us a wave. Deirdre Gillard Rawlings. In addition to her eldritch contribution to our 2016 season, Deirdre played Audrey in As You Like It. In 2014, she was Yvette in Mother Courage. She was also in our productions of The Breathing Hole, Treasure Island, The Diary of Anne Frank, and Oedipus Rex. Third witch, give us a wave. Lenise Antoine Shelley, actor, director, visual artist. He's also played Sue Bayless in that wonderful 2016 production of All My Sons, as well as roles in the Aeneid. Her screen credits include the popular TV series Empire, Chicago Fire, and Chicago Med. And my question for you 3 is, are you responsible for making it snow in Stratford this morning? Which seems to have stopped now. Seriously. Let's open the batting with a question that actually came in during the live viewing party on Thursday night. This question was actually posed to Ian, but to kind of warm us up, I think I'm going to ask it of each of you, except, I guess, for Thomas, who we'll get to later. But that question from a chap called James Bernhardt was this: what's it like to be delivering lines that many people in the audience know really well? And I think that's probably true for most of your characters, that you, at some point, you say something that everyone in the audience could probably say along with you. What did that feel like? Let's throw that to Ian first, since it was originally posed to him. Thoughts?
Well, it's funny. I think I said something in the chat that it's daunting, and it is, but sometimes it can be really annoying when you're about to say a line and someone in the audience like whispers it ahead of you. Happened almost every night in the Tomorrow Speech. Before I would say the last line, someone would be like, signifying nothing, and you just kind of have to tune it out. But But no, I mean, it is daunting because you're saying words that everyone already like has thought about and has theories on in their own way that it is. And I think the hardest was on opening night when I knew there was like probably 4 or 5 actors I really admired who had played that part already and said those words, not just from being a fan, but having actually like gone through it. I mean, we had a couple of them even in our show with Joe and Scott. So that was the hardest one, definitely. I think it was the "if it were done" speech. When I walked out, I was like, oh crap, there's Colum's here, Ben Carlson's here. Like, okay, don't mess this up. You know.
What about you, Kristen? Out damn spot. I mean,
I mean, it's a lot of pressure, and you kind of have the idea of all these legendary actors in your head, and it just it's difficult to shake. And then I think you just have to accept it as a part of playing those roles and try to find yourself in it as best you can, or bring yourself to it as best you can. Yeah.
yeah. And Michael,
it's crazy when you have those moments where people are. I had that similar experience last year with Othello, with people wanting to finish your sentences, which usually I took as to mean that I was going too slowly. So they were like, "Come on, pick up the pace." No, it was the director being like, "Okay, come on, pick it up." It's fun. I don't really feel the pressure on it because I'm like, okay, well, this is me doing this for the first time. So, hey guys, I'm just gonna give this a kick at the can and see how it goes. I don't really get thrown by those sort of things. I get thrown by the pressure when people put that on it, and then I go, well, I don't want to think of it in that way. If I start thinking of speeches as being too precious or having too much weight, and they're not running through me as an actor to just like be in the now and in the moment, then I'm like, then I feel the best about what I'm doing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Double toil and how does that go again? Any thoughts? I shouldn't call you witches. Weird sisters.
Yes.
So I mean,
I remember. Sorry, David. I remember being told by a friend after one of the first previews for student matinees that they came upon some young girls that were reenacting the scene on the little band shell down by the waterfront. So I took that to be a compliment.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. What about Deirdre and Lenise? Any thoughts on this one?
It was a great challenge. It was like,
yeah,
because people have in their heads, what the witches are, and it was just, we worked really hard to pull that apart, and we were lucky because we had time at the very beginning. And Heidi, who we were working with, Heidi Strauss, she just allowed us to find these completely different paths from each other, even. So it was. I kind of like that people had expectations, because then we knew what to shatter in a way. You know what I mean? We knew what we were up against, kind of.
Yeah.
And there was something really, really exciting about that.
And I think we did aim to surprise them too. We took our own route because our process was different from any other process, I imagine. And we really reveled in that, and we played with that in mind, of just creating new opportunities for people to find something new in this language, for us to find something new. So I think we accomplished surprising them, I'd like to say.
You guys were awful to walk by backstage. You guys terrified me from the beginning of the season to the end of this. Like, I never got used to like the eyes. I didn't get used to like Deirdre's bald head. I didn't get used to Bridget, like her like dead Wilma Flintstone.
And our teeth.
Yeah, and your teeth.
How gnarly our teeth
like,
were.
Oh my God.
You were all pretty scary. Sorry,
I'm set to jump on that.
you were all,
You to see all 3 of them here again. I'm like, all right.
they look much better than they did on stage.
Oh yeah.
So, gosh, questions are pouring in fairly quickly here. We actually have viewers here from Toronto, Notre Dame, Hudson, Ohio, Redditch, UK, Winnipeg, Burlington, Rockford, Michigan, Detroit, Stratford, Dayton, Ohio, Montreal, St. Mary's, Georgetown, Ithaca. We've got a lot of people watching here, and the questions are actually coming in. So I'm just going to start looking at these. This is a question from Jackie Z, or Z if you're in the States, to Michael Blake. About Macduff and Malcolm. What do you think, or what did you discover about Macduff's relationship to the monarchy itself, to Macbeth and Malcolm as people and rulers, about Malcolm throwing Macduff's failures back in his face? Wow, that's... You want a few minutes to think about that, or?
No, it's interesting. Like yeah, it's such a specific relationship to the play. As I worked through it, I wasn't familiar. I'd never done Macbeth before, and I remember, the second that Duncan is killed and he finds his body, Macduff removes himself. The country's already in turmoil at that point, and so so Duncan's placed back on the throne and then immediately killed, and Macduff removes himself, and he knows that someone needs to be there, someone young, someone right, and the question was that how did I feel about the relationship with the monarchy?
Yeah, your relationship to the monarchy.
I really believe that he saw so much death. He's seen so much strife through that period that he's just looking for a younger answer. You look at leaders and the leaders that were around, and after Duncan, who I think he loved and believed would have been a good leader. And it's not that he didn't think that Macbeth wouldn't have been, but just the way it all played out for him was just a little too shady always. And he struggled with trying to understand where Malcolm was coming from. I think he gets blindsided by Malcolm's cunning in that scene where he's testing me to see how I play off of it. And it was always a tricky and fun scene, because that scene, Anthony really worked with Antoine Yarrett and I quite a bit, and we really wanted to crack open that scene and try and understand what was happening for the two men underneath it. And Macduff by no means is a pure, perfect person, but he just wants to see right in the world. I had young Oliver Newdorf, who played my son, and he was a white kid. And Sarah Affel and I, this was my backstory. I'm going to give you a little secret about the play. Oliver was a white kid, and Sarah Affel and I were playing Lady Macduff, and Macduff. We're both black. And I was like, oh, we have a white son. That's really interesting. And I always created this backstory for myself that he was the dead son, the son of my dead best friend who had been killed in the wars, and that we had taken him in, and that he was a part of that perhaps Macduff became this father figure for young boys to nurture and take care of them. And I sort of used that as my through line for the whole play, that like the world needs to get better with these younger men. And Malcolm seemed to be the first place to start the play with, and not men that had been to war and had been in the secret meetings and all of that, but like a new age of something. I hope that answers the question.
That's terrific. Children, or the lack of children, of course, I think is a significant element in this play, and that may feed into a question that's probably a lot of people would be wondering about, which is, this one comes specifically from Agnes Yakshaw, and she says, please talk about having a younger than usual Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. And I know Anthony, I've heard Anthony speak about this, and both of you too as well. But you wanna just address that question, both Ian and Kristen?
Sure.
Go for it. Ian first. Ian, do you want to?
No, I've already talked. Kristen.
Okay.
Okay.
I think that it really, for us anyway, it helped with the speed of the play and being young and ambitious. It really fed the action of the story. So that was something that I found to be really helpful way, like hook into the play. Ian?
Yeah, I think
You
I
held
know
her up,
Anthony and I,
yeah.
we talked a lot like before the entire casting had even been like settled on, like early days. We were just talking about the fact that we wanted to explore the story when the central couple is at the beginning of their lives together. And yes, they've had some history, and of course we know they lost a child, and they're, you know, they're not obviously like just freshly married, but they have a lot of their legacy in front. They have their entire legacy in front of them, and they're not, you know, they're not the type of couple to like, let's just stop and think this all through. They're young and they are impetuous, and they aren't, you know, maybe weighing the entire consequences of every choice they make, which is indicative of younger people. I think more mature, experienced people, based on that experience, know a little bit better. And I've always seen this play performed by, you know, people more in their mid to late 40s. And I think it works that way. I mean, I hope I can still be playing the part in my mid 40s. And even things like Patrick Stewart played it as a much older Macbeth with a much younger wife. And I think that dynamic, as far as being behind some of the reasons that he goes to the great lengths that he goes to at the end of his life, also makes sense. But for us, it was, I think, really interesting to explore these people as inexperienced and as just very hungry to build a future together. And so we could focus it on a marriage that had hope, rather than a marriage that had already kind of like had a ton of you know, difficulty and darkness and failure, and now this is one last, you know, Hail Mary, so to speak.
There's another question here about Lady Macbeth. A question for Kristen, obviously. Kristen B here is wondering if anything changed in your performance, either by choice or accident, when, oh, and of course this touches on the famous Macbeth curse, because you, towards the end of the run, there were a couple of changes. When Cyrus and Jamie Mack had to step in for Ian, when Ian, you suffered an injury in this show. And the question for Kristen here is, did you have to adjust anything in your performance to deal with a succession of different husbands?
Well, I found it was really it was an out of body experience, because I had to get used to like different, like the feel of different people. They smelled different, you know, like it was like, because we had
Don't go there.
well, you know what, like it was we had built the relationship together Ian and I had built that relationship from the very beginning. So it was, I have a very hard time articulating how that felt. I did feel kind of in a state of shock, kind of having different people coming in and out of it. And you do the best. I mean, Cyrus and Jamie did an incredible job. I was blown out of the water at how they could just inhabit and embody it on the spur of the moment like that. And we made connections very, very quickly. It was, I think it was a shock for everybody involved. I think everybody kind of was in a state of shock.
I was.
Yeah, I remember, I will never forget the look on your face in the dressing room afterwards. I was like, oh my gosh.
I was on stage with him.
Oh my
Yeah.
Lord.
Yeah.
He handled it like a boss. Ian had blown his Achilles just before. Do you mind me talking about this, Ian?
Go for it.
Oh, okay. And we had more lines and more fighting to do. And I thought he'd maybe turned his ankle or something. And so we'd sort of done the fight so much and had worked so hard at it that we could give each other little looks at each other to be like, whoa, okay, let's speed it up. Whoa, you're coming a little hot with the fight, because it was a really angry sort of fight. You could get lost in it. And we were able to gauge each other, and I could see something was off. Ian had to go backwards with me hacking and slashing at him on one leg and got off like a boss. It was.
And we were backstage waiting to come on for that last scene. And I just remember hearing this noise, and I was like, something is so wrong. Like, as soon as Ian cleared, it was like I heard this ache of pain, and I was like, oh, okay, something's happening. But we had to go out and, like, finish that little mound of people. I was like, I was terrified the whole time I was on stage. I had no idea what had happened.
Me neither. That was the weirdest part. I had no idea. I just heard a pop and my foot stopped working, and I was like, something's wrong. And I wanted to get off stage, and actually I have a line in the middle of that fight where I say, "I'll not fight with thee," which is like the perfect, like, okay, cool, I can get out of here. But it's like, actually there were stairs. When I say that line, I'm like facing the stairs, and I was just like, I can't do stairs right now. My foot doesn't work. And then I was also like, I must tell the story. he has to finish the story fighting like that. Save for my art kicked in. But yeah, that's the last time I was ever on stage, was that moment.
Did this incident? I know we all joke about the supposed curse, and Macbeth is supposed to be an unlucky play. Did this experience, and I'll ask this of the three witchy ladies, did this experience make you think there might be something in that at all?
There were quite a few things that happened during that production, but I don't know whether it was attributed to the curse or just people's bad luck, personal bad luck.
What else happened? I don't remember.
There were two cars.
Evie got hurt.
Yeah.
And then Kristen showed up to rehearsal with a broken foot, was it?
Ankle.
Ankle. Yeah.
We worked really hard to try and counteract, because a lot of the words we were saying, we felt had a lot of power in them, and we did. And I mean, that's, I think we discussed before that, I think that's why we got up to so much foolishness, because we needed a way to sort of depressurize, and just sort of let that go. And you have to inhabit it, and when you're inhabiting it, you have to mean it. But then finding a way to not live in that world all the time, like, I think that's where a lot of the fun that we all had backstage came from.
Have like a Twitter experience, like you guys were living on Twitter or Instagram or something like that. You guys were posting all kinds of stuff. Really?
I got a couple of questions that I'd like to ask Thomas. Maybe the first one, since we're talking a wee bit about creepy, strange things. There's a moment in the show where Bridget, your first witch, goes into sort of full exorcist mode and starts speaking in a demonically possessed voice, which is very much like a male voice. Thomas and Bridget also, how was that achieved? Was that pre-recorded, or how did you manage it?
Well, Bridget had a microphone, and when Anthony first talked about this, I knew it needed some kind of pitch shifting thing, but normal pitch shifting sounds a little funny and artificial, but there's a different kind of pitch shifting, which is kind of called formant pitch shifting, where it leaves certain elements of your voice the same, and then it finds other elements and allows you to change the pitch so it sounds more natural. So we found this little effect and put it in line. So it's actually just her speaking through this effect, which lowers the pitch of her voice, but sort of makes it sound more like natural still.
Wow. Was that hard for you to do, Bridget? Was there any kind of time lag? And sometimes with electronic stuff, there's a little bit of a lag. Or
Not that I recall. I don't think I had to change my performance at all. I just went about my business and just
Throwing up a thumb, you know.
just throwing up a
Yeah.
pilot's thumb. Mhm.
Yeah.
fair enough.
We spent more time choreographing the throwing up of the thumb than anything else in that moment.
Yeah. Wow. Who would have thought that was so hard? That's amazing.
It was fun to watch it the other night.
Yeah, it was a pass off. So I had it the whole time. I had a bunch of different people parts tucked into me. And then I like discreetly handed it off, and it worked every night.
Wow.
Watching it, I forgot that I had the baby in the cauldron outside.
Oh, you were
Yeah.
the baby.
We looked down and we would see your face.
Right.
It was a pretty real looking baby.
Yeah, it was very janky.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it was like some sort of like silicone rubber. It was weird.
Yeah, you used to actually, Mike. I remember sometimes you used to give me you would look at me in a way like the audience couldn't see your head, but I could see you, and you would like give me a face to talk to while I had all those lines that I'm saying into the cauldron. I remember one day asking you, be like, "Hey, can you actually look at me? Because I'm speaking into like the abyss, and I would love to like actually have a face to say words to."
Right. How I was holding your lines up.
So good.
Thomas, there's a really a large part of creating a very spooky kind of experience is lighting and sound. And you had some really interesting sounds going on kind of throughout the production here. And I know that on our Stratfest at Home a section of our website, there's a video called Sound Designer's Story, in which you explain specifically how some of that was created. But I'd love to hear you say something about it right now, because as I recall, it involves a rusty tap.
Yeah, I mean, Anthony quite early on had talked about wanting an almost cinematic soundscape going through a lot of the plays. So I knew I had to start thinking of things. And this was actually the second Macbeth I did that year, I think. So I always want to try to do something unique. So I was really thinking hard about it quite early on. And yeah, I was in Montreal, and the tap in the bathroom just started to make some funny sounds. And I just started playing with it, and I recorded it, and it just made this like a drone, like a low resonating note that was I just thought was really cool. And I used that for a lot of, like the big fight scene between Macduff and Macbeth. I used that underneath.
So how did you manipulate it? Like slow it down, speed it up? Like what did you?
No, I didn't. A lot of the time, as sound designers, that's what you do. You change the pitch, or you put reverb on it, or you do different things like that. But the sound itself was actually really. It was really. I think it was the piping underneath the sink that was just like vibrating, and it just reached this resonance. So I just kind of layered up a few different sections of the recording I made to thicken it. But there's a lot of creepy stuff. Another thing I did was there are these recordings from this exorcism, Annalise, Michael, or something like that, where I sort of went through meticulously all of these recordings and removed the priest's voices and kept just her voice, sort of in this sounding very demonic. And I kind of made a sort of soundscape type thing out of that as well, which is used particularly, I think it's in the sort of Murder of the Macduff family. It's underneath there. It's a very whispery, creepy kind of sound. Wow. And a lot of animal sounds too.
Yeah.
Glad you didn't tell me that.
Here's a question too. The questions are coming in so fast. I'm not going to be able to get to all of them. I'm so sorry, but here's one about from Rob Ellerby, who says the lighting, or rather the lack of it, was really an original and effective way of staging the production. So, I mean, how were you? It was pretty dark on that stage, and the question really is, how did you cope with that? Was it difficult to find your way around? Were you really watching the floor to make sure you didn't trip over anything? Any thoughts on that from anyone?
I think it appears darker on film than it actually felt in the space. I think all of I felt like my eyes were very it's so dark backstage, so it actually is brighter out on stage than it is backstage. And I feel like also in the audience, I actually had the experience of being in the audience for this show. And in the audience, in that theater, you adjust and it doesn't seem so dark. But I don't know about you guys. I never really had any moment where I felt like, oh no, it's too dark. I don't know what's going on.
I had a few of those moments.
Oh, you got
just
contact
because I had contacts in that obscured my vision, and so whitewashed everything. So therefore, I was relying a lot on Dee Dee and Bridget to lead me around, especially backstage. And we were barefoot to boot, so we really had to be careful. And many times, Dee Dee, while snickering, would say, "Oh wait,
Joe Denise,
Denise, that's a wall."
So
yeah, she had to be nice to me.
Those lenses must have been pretty uncomfortable. Have you ever worn contact lenses?
Yes, I have to wear corrective lenses in life, and so it wasn't that much of an ordeal putting them in. But that means that I didn't have any kind of visual aid on me. And then backstage, we have some photos of me with my actual glasses and the contacts.
Ooh, scary. Bridget, you were kind of the eyes of the trio, weren't you, in some kind of way, right? Were you sort of, you looked like you were the one who could really see.
I'm not sure that's true. I think what we've determined was that which one asked the questions, which two kind of qualified things. Sorry, my laptop was moving. And then it was actually which three who had sight or insight. So it was actually which three who was the seer.
Yeah, of course, the blind seer. Very
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Okay, more questions. Well, actually, more witch questions. Here's Jeff Scott. In this play, I feel that the witches are almost elements of nature. In this production, I found they're almost, it's maybe not a very flattering question, I found you're almost a part of the lighting and set. Can the witches?
I think that's flattering.
Yeah.
Well, we disappeared. I loved how we disappeared, like on the heath at the beginning. He turned one way and then poof, we were gone, and then poof, we were gone. You know, like we try. I think when we all had the discussion at first, we talked about how the witches aren't just like trying to take this guy down. That we saw something in him, and then as a natural way, we allowed it to decay. We fanned the flames of the decay in a way. I think that's kind of where we came from, as if we were sort of elemental. You know,
we actually talked about early on in rehearsals coming out of the earth. Do you guys remember that? Yeah. And we tried to choreograph that and figure out our costumes so that we could literally rise from the earth. And that would have been really awesome. But there was definitely something elemental and earthly and ageless about us. And we loved that. We leaned into that.
Yeah, and we hid in the shadows too. We lived in the shadows.
Here's a question that I know a lot of people always wonder about the art of acting in general, but this one's directed to Ian specifically. So there comes that moment where you're told that Lady Macbeth has died, and there's a significant pause, and then we see tears, and the question is, how do you, it comes from Galen Wilson, how are you able to do that? How are you able to cry on stage, to summon up tears on demand?
Well, sometimes there's tears and sometimes there's not tears. I never was like trying to cry in that moment. I'm not gonna lie, the first time I saw that speech on the filmed version, I was like, because there's this tear that falls like right on the second tomorrow, and they're filming it in such a tight close-up that you would have not noticed if you were in the audience that day. So that was just something that happened, and I will be so honest, when I first saw it, I was very happy, even though I never once felt satisfied with that speech. I talked about that in the
from the rusty tap. It could have been a drip.
Yeah, it was the rusty tap. Yeah, but it's like, if you're invested in a story and you're speaking from a place of truth, and you get the news that your wife has just died, of course it's going to summon up emotion. I think actually in that moment, it's about trying not to get too emotional, and try to maintain some hold on yourself, which for Macbeth at that point is completely crumbling. So sometimes it had a sadness, sometimes it felt more angry. Sometimes, I mean, that speech takes on a different life every time you speak it, and so it just so happened that there was like a nicely timed teardrop there, but it's not like I was like, and on the second tomorrow we fall. It's just a thing. I try to never be aiming for emotion, because I don't think that should ever be the point. It should always be the byproduct of being invested in a story.
Sure.
Well said.
Kristen, here's a sort of similar question for you. The sleepwalking scene, where she's really losing it psychologically. Here's a question from Joseph. How did you prepare for that scene every night? And how did you come out of it off stage?
You spend the intermission kind of getting revved up, sort of, or sometimes I would take a nap. One or the other. I honestly don't have a logical answer for that. I just know that you kind of try your best to get into whatever you imagine that headspace to be. And then afterwards, I genuinely felt frightened, and I'd kind of say a little prayer for her and for me, because I genuinely felt it was very scary territory. And you have to do something at the end to kind of bless her, bless me, bless everyone, and kind of let it go, because it felt scary, much like the material that the witches are calling on. I find it genuinely scary stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's emotionally draining, of course, and you probably come off stage and need a nice cup of tea or something after that.
Yeah, I feel
Yes, tea. Yes, tea.
Yeah, tea. A good strong cup of tea.
Drink so much tea at the end of every performance.
Or liquids to that effect. Here's a question. Well, here's a question for the Macbeths. Also from Galen Wilson. And Galen's referencing a blurb somewhere on YouTube that says Macbeth and Lady Macbeth did what they do for each other. So the question for Kristen and Ian is, did you in fact feel that your character's primary motives were for each other's advancement or for your own? Which is kind of an interesting question.
I think it's it's crystal clear they do it for each other. There's neither of them ever really talk especially when it comes to like what they want in the future. They never talk about wanting it like, I want this for me. It's I think they really are devoted to each other. I mean, so much so that they completely lose their minds and souls in an effort to give the other person happiness and comfort and a legacy and children and power and all of it. I think it's only at the end when she's dead that Macbeth starts to really talk about like me, I when and that's about the prophecy and his invincibility and all that. But yeah, I think 100% they do it for each other. Kristen?
Yeah, they're so enmeshed. They're so like one being almost, their connection is so deep. So it's always for the other person. And I think that's what they live and breathe for, is for each other.
Here's a question from Anne Hodges. Another amazing technical moment in the show was that transition into the banquet scene. So if you remember, there's the murder of Banquo, and then instantly, like a jump cut, a cinematic jump cut, the stage is full of a banquet, which never surprises us in a film, but of course it was actually like that in the theater. And the question is, this person would love to hear a bit more about that. And Thomas, I don't know, I can't recall if sound played an element in that or not, but if it did, please jump in.
It kind of did. Initially, Anthony almost wanted the I think it's the murder of Banquo that happens right before that, all recorded. So that he could keep things really dark while that table was being set up. So that didn't quite work because it just wasn't quite the same as having the live actors. But we did try to certainly really, really isolate that scene, sort of in the vom or away from the center part of the stage where the table was being set up. And yeah, there's some loud, crazy stuff happening with the sound that keeps you occupied, and then a big boom, and all of a sudden that table is set up.
And Thomas, when you're doing the sound for something like this, I guess one difficult thing is that you have to strike a balance between creating, your artistic effect, and yet always there's always being careful to not kind of override what the actors are doing. I mean, keep the sound there so people notice it, but in the background, that must be a tricky thing to do. Is that just a question of years of experience, or?
Yeah, I guess so. You always just keep it's a little bit like when you're mixing a record or something like that. You have the lead singer and you've got the instruments behind it, and you just kind of keep aware of what the main focus is and what you're doing in relation to that. And I guess just over time you really become sensitive to when something can be there at all underneath an actor, or if it is there, how loud it should be, and pick your moments to make it your own sounds loud. And it's tricky.
So,
but it's kind of what I spend all my time doing. So you just get used to it.
Isn't it also, I have a question just quickly about the festival theater. It's able to go darker than most theaters because it's zoned a stadium, is that right? Like we don't have the exit sign light bleed and stuff like that. I remember hearing that when I was in Stratford. Is that true, Bridget? That it's zoned differently, and we can have a true blackout in that theater, whereas in most theaters you can't do that. So Anthony knows how to manipulate that space so beautifully,
I think that's true. I think that it can go very dark. I think the only thing they can't cut out, obviously, are the exit signs that have lights built in. But yeah, it can go very dark. Yeah.
It was certainly dark enough that no one could see. I mean, you guys all had to tiptoe tiptoe on stage in the dark and not trip over anything.
Well, it was a carpet, so.
Shag carpet.
Shag carpet.
It looked like grass.
It would be great if we had like Emilio Vieira and Tim Campbell here, because those were the guys that had to wheel in that massive table in the pitch darkness while the murder of Banquo was happening.
And we had to clear while they were doing that. Like they were coming up our bomb, I believe. And we were like, okay, we gotta get it. So we were had to get out. It was crazy.
I mean, when it comes to the darkness of the lighting design, like I feel like those are the people you should talk to about, because I know for me, I always entered on the stage when it was already, then the light was back up.
You were lucky. Here's a fundamental question about the show or about the play, I guess. And maybe it's one that the witches, the weird sisters, or the wayward sisters. I mean, that the words weird and wayward are related. And in fact, I noticed in the production, it was often being pronounced weird rather than weird, which is interesting. But the question here is it, are Lady Macbeth and the witches the prime movers in inciting Macbeth to murder? And I'm going to maybe focus that a little more on the weird sisters, because I guess the question is, to what extent do they actually have the power to make Macbeth do what he does, or are they just sort of saying, hey, here's an idea, do what you want with it? So I guess the question is, to what extent are the female characters in this show, the weird sisters and Macbeth's wife, to what extent are they the prime movers of what's happening here? Who wants to jump in on that?
I'll jump in with the word weird. It was based on Norse fates.
Yeah.
They could direct the future and man. So that's where we got the word weird from. But it was they were Norse, I'd say goddesses, actually. I remember also, Kristen, I don't know if you remember this, but the four of us always met before the show, because I think we were a kind of unit. And I don't know, I think of nature versus nurture. Like we weren't the most nurturing of mothers or women in this play. But that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I always felt that Lady Macbeth the seed was planted in her at the same time as Macbeth, or that I always felt that the seed was planted in her. That I don't know if it came from her originally, the idea.
I've always wondered about the play, because there's some ambiguity, I think, textually, in terms of, she speaks at one point about letters in the plural. We only see one letter after he's met the weird sisters. Do you think, Macbeth's, do you think that this idea of regicide, of killing Duncan, has that been floating around in their minds for some time before they meet the weird sisters? Because I was struck again watching the film by that line of, when they hail him as king, and Banquo says, why do you start at things that sound so fair? And I wondered, is that because it's touching a guilty conscience? Any thoughts about that, Ian?
A lot of thoughts, yeah. I think that's probably one of the things we flopped back and forth over in rehearsals. And it was actually only once we assumed, I mean, it seems kind of an easy assumption to make that they have talked about it. And that was kind of, I think, in rehearsals where we were at. And once we started previews, I kind of had a eureka moment that I think it's so much more powerful and the stakes are so much higher if they have not. You know, sure, they've talked about the fact that I have a potential to maybe rise up and become the king someday. But I don't think we've talked about this whole plot to murder Duncan and make this happen. And the fact is, the reason why he starts when they say that is because they say it and he doesn't go, oh, one day I'm going to be king. The first thought that he has is of murder. And then she gets the letter hearing about this prophecy. And also the first thought that she has separately is murder. And when they get together and she says, never shall sun that morrow see, about Duncan not leaving their house, and he has this moment of, oh fuck, you had that idea too. I just think it's so much more powerful if they haven't talked about it. It becomes immediate, it becomes very high stakes, it becomes very much like right here in the moment, and not, Shakespeare never writes scenes where people have like previously talked about a bunch of stuff and now they're just recapping it. He doesn't do that. Everything he writes is like in the moment thought. And so once we started performing it, I just realized it had way more gas to it if it wasn't preconceived, and it was just this thing that the moment they say thou shalt be king, he's just like murder, and that's why he has those weird moments with Ross and Tim Campbell's gonna hate me for forgetting his character's name.
Angus,
that's right. When they are giving him this great news, and he keeps having to go off to the side to like grapple with the fact that he's just immediately conjuring up all these ideas of just killing the king. And so that's where Anthony might feel differently about it, but I think that's the kind of beauty of this show and of this specific production, was that we were able to put a play together where maybe we all had our own little theories of what was behind it, but we like found a middle ground. That's where I stand.
mm-hmm.
Kristen, touching on that still, and you can expand on what Ian's saying too with this, but here's a question from Tom, who says, Lady Macbeth implores the spirits to fill her with cruelty. That's in your first scene there. Is this incantation the source of her murderous intentions? So that's an interesting question. Did you feel that in saying "come you murdering ministers," etc., something actually happened to you at that point?
I do think she becomes possessed in a way, and that's what she needs in order to go to the next level. Yeah, she needs them. If she doesn't, she needs those dark spirits to give her strength and the willingness to do whatever she needs to do for her husband. But it does feel like a possession.
It's a funny thing. I in watching the movie the other night, I started thinking about Macbeth's relationship with women in general. So we've got the wife who is urging him on. We've got the three weird sisters who have kind of planted this seed. And I've always wondered, and this is really a question for Michael, because I've always wondered about the whole Lady Macduff thing. Lady Macduff does not in herself present a particular threat to Macbeth, yet he goes out of his way to sort of murder her savagely. And I've always wondered why Macduff left his family behind him in the first place when he runs off to England. Did he not realize they'd be in some danger? But I also started to wonder about whether Macbeth, who has been so kind of pushed by women, is actually taking some kind of weird, twisted revenge against the feminine in the world, which is a thought that just came to me out of nowhere watching that scene. Michael, do you have any thoughts about
my God, that's a wild.
Yeah, I know.
That's a wild perspective, man. Yeah, she's certainly not happy with me in that scene, is she, Lady Macduff?
Yeah.
Yeah, through that, and we have no scenes together. She doesn't speak well of me, and then she gets offed. Yeah.
Why does she not speak well of you? Is it because you kind of abandoned her?
Well, yes, of course, but it's also like he also doesn't take the easiest route possible, which is to go to the coronation, to just allow this new succession to just follow through. He immediately leaves for Fife. He immediately leaves and then runs off to England. I don't know. He smells something in the air, like something's just not right. Like I think the political and social unrest in Scotland at that time has just eaten at him enough at some point, and he's possibly had enough. He's broken in some way.
Because she seems quite eager to embrace the idea that he is a traitor. I mean, she doesn't, she's basically saying to.
Yeah, the act of not even being there puts him in a precarious position, does it not? And but he, for some reason, has to follow through with talking to Malcolm, finding it. Maybe he was going to murder. Like, why do they assume that I was going to side with Malcolm? I could have been going there to kill him in to support Macbeth. But like, it's immediately assumed that I'm against it all, which plays into the whole idea of the word. If you're not in line right now, and you're not doing what I say, right, that's how precarious everything is in this world. Like, the second that I don't follow through with being there for the coronation, well, he's not on my side. Screw that guy. It all plays into the nature of the nature of where everyone lives. Ian was talking earlier about, he immediately thinks murder, but it's like, well, he's not going to pull a Richard III and puppet string people. He's of a warrior class and says, "Oh, I'll kill him. I can do that." Like, we all take it on ourselves, and there's something about the people at the top not getting well, you do get those two murderers to kill Banquo, but yeah, sorry, someone jump in here. I'm holding on by a thread. Because it's been so long, David. It's been I watched it the other night, like through my fingers like this. I was like, and like, you just get rushes of emotion and of the beauty and the whole experience of, and the time of doing a piece like that is so overwhelming. And then it's amazing to be here right now and to rediscover it and talk about it again. But yeah, it's the thoughts of that time are just like so overwhelming. Anybody, please.
It's okay. You don't have
to have that on film.
It was a good answer. I'm sorry for throwing such a weird question.
No, it's great. It's great. I'm so glad to be here.
Here's how are we doing for time? Getting a little close. Here's a question, a fairly light question, I guess, for everyone. What do we know about how Shakespeare's audience would have received those supernatural elements? Do we think they were believers in a way that a modern audience is not? Does anyone? Is this something that was talked about in rehearsal, or is it kind of irrelevant to a modern day production? But what's your sense? Anybody?
I think in the world of the play, it's very real for the characters in the play. Those elements, the supernatural. I feel like it takes place in a time where that's just a part of living in the world, is that you're interacting with supernatural forces, and so they're very real for the characters of the play. I always felt, and then for the audience, I'm not sure if I know enough about history to know exactly what they believed in specifically. I know in Ireland they believed in fairies, and that was a very real part of life, even to some people to this day. And but I imagine that it was collectively kind of like agreed upon that that's possible.
At the end of the play, I always took that moment of like, when Malcolm is ascended and I'm standing there on the balcony with Macduff's head, and then the witches come out and no one else sees the witches, I always made a point of looking at, it's the first time that Macduff sees the witches, and then he's like, who are those? What's going on? And then the play ends. That was all.
Like, oh wait. I seem to remember something about King James being like extremely superstitious, and so
Yes.
it was almost like the law that you had to believe in witches and sorcery and stuff. So yeah, I think Macbeth was really writing to an audience and a crowd of people that were like, oh no, this can happen.
He wrote a book about it, actually.
Yeah.
So listen, at that stunning moment at the end of the play, when the three witches suddenly appeared, that was an amazing way to end that production. I wish I could think of an equally amazing way to end this session, but we are in fact out of time, and I'm being frantically told by my handlers to get off the air. So I want to thank you all for participating in this. Deirdre, Lanice, Bridget, Kristen, Michael, Thomas, and Ian, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a fascinating discussion. I'll be back next week with other people to talk about, what is it, The Tempest, I think. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining us, and please keep watching our film series because there's a lot of good stuff still to come. Yeah. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, David.
Have a good day and get out there.